What's up, y'all? We are back for our final mix breakdown of the year.
What are you at?
My name is Ron.
I'm Red.
We're brothers, grew up in the same home, and we go by the Keymakers.
Today we're going to dive into our track Problematic. The song came out about 4 weeks ago.
Depending on when you're watching.
Yeah, depending on when you're watching. And we've really appreciated all the feedback so far. It's got a lot of layers to this track, so we're gonna, be as thorough as we can and hop into each element and share some of what made it all happen.
Yeah, at least give you a little taste. Okay, let's start with the arpeggio.
So this is a cool one to talk about. This arpeggio, I'll open up this. I am intimidated by this word. I believe it's pronounced Cthulhu. But either way, this is what it looks like. Basically, it's made by Steve Duda, and I'm sure he had help. But it's a chord as well as arpeggio engine. So what we initially did with this is we had our own chords, and Rome composed some chords, but then we ran it through this arpeggio engine, right, that has certain patterns as well as up downs. These arrows mean it restarts the cadence. But we just kind of played around with it a little bit until we had a fully fleshed out arp, and then we were able to bounce that down into MIDI like this, all these small notes here with different velocities and all of that nuance inside it. But that's really what drives the track. Right, so let's listen to that soloed real quick.
Yeah, and when we don't always make arpeggios like that. Actually, we rarely do these days. We started this song several years ago. What, 3 years ago? 3 years ago? At least 2 years ago, back on the East Coast. But when we do, the cool thing about making it in MIDI is that we also get the opportunity to move around certain notes if we don't like the thing that we got from Cthulhu. I don't remember if we did that with this one, but if you look here, once you have it in this form, you can say, hey, I'd rather this note hit a little bit different. And we always do that type of experimentation just to make sure we really like where it sits in the final product.
So once we had the synth fleshed out, we added a few layers, which we didn't end up keeping in, but it kind of inspired us a little bit to develop some of the other layers in the track that you'll hear later on as we move to the synth and the other aspects of it. One additional layer that we did decide to keep is this noise right here. And it just plays off some of the tonalities and the harmonies that are playing in the synth. That just kind of keeps the song driving, and most importantly, for the flow of the track, makes it different from this 16-bar segment. Now it's kind of growing as the pre-chorus and the verse start, that you can continue to get that feeling that the song is building. The next thing we'll talk about is the bass. Cool thing about the bass, and it was really fun in the production.
Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom.
Is if we check out this MIDI, it's just the same as the arp with all of the higher notes highlighted and erased. Right, so initially these notes were present in the arp itself, and they're not duplicate because we took them out of the arp and then just made them its own channel to represent the bass. But the arp together, right, if you build out an arp that sounds good on its own, and then you take some elements, move them to a different instrument, those instruments are likely going to play well off of each other melodically and rhythmically because they used to be one. So with this bass, that's exactly what we did, right? We grabbed these elements down here, and they sound like this by themselves. Right, and that sounds a little bit random, kind of just notes playing at times that aren't, natural, if you will. But then once you play it along with the arp, the arp helps escort it a little bit to the next phrase of bass notes that are coming in. So it was really fun putting that together, sort of one of those things that you have like a creative idea and it ends up working out, which is nice. We also, initially with the bass, got to use this bad boy up here, our mini log synthesizer. It's an analog synth that we were able to route the MIDI to and then take the signal and run it back into our computer and get a higher layer of the bass. Next up is the percussion, which kind of evolves throughout the track. A lot of hi-hats, as you see here. This is this channel. Next channel here is just general percussion, which we'll solo and play for you. But really that only happens in the hook section. And then here is sort of the main percussion that is going to happen throughout, introduce itself in the hook, and then continue to grow. So to solo the hi-hats first, we will play just this. And then as that progresses, we add in another layer. Let's zoom into the MIDI so we can see what that looks like here. Right, there's two layers stacked on top of each other of that same open hat. And it's just a brighter sound, right? A little bit higher pitched, a little bit more shakery, and it really adds a lot of brightness. So then when we listen to that together in the mix, we'll take off the clap for now. Back where I started, wondering if I can live. Right, so that just keeps the flow going, gives it a little bit of a housey vibe. Moving into the next chunk of percussion, which we'll look at right now with a solo. So these are a bit weirder sounds, right? More kind of ear candy. That helps the track move, but isn't as reliable and dependent as just a constant hi-hat, kicking on every downbeat or so.
And with this percussion in particular, we made it after we already had the hook for the song and a lot of the other elements. So one thing we tried to do was really mirror or play off of what the vocal melody is doing. So the way it starts is like, I can't leave you alone. It's like a call and response. It comes in that little gap in the hook.
So listening to the hi-hats plus the percussion together, we'll play it right now. And then to highlight what Rome just said, we'll play that with the vocals soloed as well. I can't leave you alone. I never understand what I do this for. I wish that I could try. So now we're just adding the clap in, and we all kind of know what to expect out of the clap. It's steady on the 2s and the 4s, but listening to it with all of these elements gives it a really full feel of the percussion. And then since we're on percussion, we don't need to spend too much time on it, but we'll just play how that all sounds with the kick. We do have a tone or a tuned kick on this track, so I'll just play that same section with the percussion and then add the kick in after a few seconds.
So yeah, put all that together in terms of what we've talked about so far, and in that same section it sounds like this.
So one element that isn't really featured throughout the entirety of the track, we just pull it in the bridge and then it kind of leads into that second drop, is this group of pads here. And you can see how many layers we added to these pads because we wanted it to feel really, really full, but also spread around the stereo spectrum a little bit. So we have them panned out to the left, panned out to the right, some center, so on and so forth.
Yeah, we talked about this in another mix breakdown, but the bridge, kind of the breakdown of the track, is when we really like to make things really atmospheric and euphoric and just really bring out a lot of emotion. And like Red said, with pads you can get a really, really full sound, and it really helps accomplish that when you have chords playing and different melodies playing solo, but they're all they have this full dreamlike quality to them. It really helps bring that out.
So it really starts to make that dream space kind of feel where you're kind of floating around in these harmonies, but they're playing the same chords, right? So when one changes, another one changes, especially with this rhythm, right? It sits on top of the bed that these bottom three create, and it can give it a little bit more bounce and texture and movement. And then for this last pad, we approached it a little bit differently.
Yeah, so that's a vocal pad and higher than everything else, but it really brings out another layer. And then one thing you're probably hearing, like Red mentioned this, but the bounce, that's all coming from this top pad, which we can take a look at. Yeah, so as you can see, this orange line here is automating the rhythm that this pad is playing at. So the goal here was to kind of differentiate it from the rest of the pads, but also really build this tension throughout the breakdown that is all leading up to the hook part. Yeah, so like I mentioned, we started this song, I think 2.5 years ago. It was one of the last things we started before we left Cambridge and came to Los Angeles. And for a long time, this song was really just that arp and bass that Red talked about earlier, and then the vocals that we had, ideas for on top of it, and like a kick. We didn't have much else. So when we were building it this year and really trying to make it into a complete track, there were a lot of things we had to do. And we had individual sessions on the track, like we often do. Where like Red one night would spend time working on one thing, another night I spent time working on a different thing. And when I was working on it one night, I was really focused on this intro section. And at the time it was really just bass underneath and the arp. And I wanted to bring out some fullness, I wanted to give it some more character. And this, I kind of stumbled into, so there was a track buried somewhere that was a percussion that Red had worked on in a previous session. And it had these first three notes, but it wasn't a synth or a pluck. It was like a percussion, and they weren't really notes. They were just the things that he had found in the drum rack to make percussive sounds. But I figured instead of starting from scratch with a new MIDI, I would just like start with this one. So I put a synth on it, and it ended up being this sound. So yeah, after hearing how that sounded with the arp and everything else that was going on, I really fell in love with it. And before we go to the rest of the intro, we'll just talk about a couple of the synths that are in this track. Here's one that you definitely would have heard. It comes in the that hook section we were just looking at leading up to the drop. So yeah, this is actually this is another holdover from the before time. We had this same melody, and I think it was actually the same sound. We did some tampering with it this time around. Added this because I know we didn't have Saturn back in Cambridge, and probably played with some of the intricacies of the sound itself. But generally, it's the same sound, and we really liked it. So for us, it was a matter of like, can we still make this work within all the other things that are going on in this section? And we think we found a way to do that. But yeah, it has that like electric guitar feel, even though it's not one. It really helps add to the emotion that we're trying to create in that section. Back to that intro section. So like I was saying, we each had individual sessions with it. One individual session, Red made this Flutter Synth, which at the time was like, I think it was going through the entire track. And when I first heard it, I wasn't a huge fan, and it was much louder than it is in this version of the mix. But I really liked something about what it was doing, and we ended up keeping like, just a hair of it. But I really think it helps build this intro section. Yeah, it just kind of hangs in the air there, but it really, I don't know, sounds cool. The other thing you're hearing in this intro is these vocals down here, and these were like the final piece to round it out. One thing we do sometimes is just like find a set of vocal chops, we call them, that we like, and then try to manipulate them and play with them in cool ways. Most of the sounds themselves have these things that you can alter. So if you set up a MIDI and just kind of run it on one of these sounds, then you can really experiment with how it sounds. So we found one which I would not be able to find again, because we ended up recording it onto an audio track. But we found one that we really liked, and then I just kind of played it a bunch and tried to capture audio recordings of segments that I liked. Yeah, it's a bunch of random stuff. Yeah, so there's a lot in there, but they all play their part. And then when you hear that last one, it starts to get a little bit melodic. And that is what led us to the other vocal effects that you hear throughout the track, which come in the drop. These kind of more rhythmic, staccato sounding vocal hits.
Let's do it the way that we used to. One more time. You've been helping yourself. I can't find no one else.
So even right there's some real subtle use of some pitched vocals, which will solo so you can hear.
Helping yourself. I can't find no one else. Right back where I started.
So it's not, we're not sending them all the way up to chipmunk land or like way down to the depths or anything like that, but it's creating a almost like a chorus effect, right? Like there's multiple singers with multiple deliveries delivering that line, but really it's just, I think in my mind, tasteful use of technology to kind of get that effect. Right. And get a cool feeling throughout the verse.
Yeah, it adds a layer of texture that can be really cool, even if you don't notice it that blatantly as you're listening to it. And what we try to do normally when I'm comping the vocals is have the main track, the main vocal, be the best take, but then try to utilize other takes for these things so that it sounds a little bit different and it isn't hitting in the same exact spot. And then one other thing about these vocals, I think with the last song we did, we had the lyrics written for this track, way back in its beginning stage, but this first verse was rewritten a few weeks before we finished the song. Just thought it wasn't passionate enough, it wasn't kind of sexy enough, it wasn't quite hitting the way that we wanted it to, so feel like it's in a better spot now.
And then with the hook, when we add in a lot of these layers here, that's when you get a lot of the power. So we'll do an interesting thing. We'll actually start with the layers and then add in the main.
I can't leave you alone. I never understand what I do this for. I wish that I could drop the habit, 'cause needing you is problematic. But you pick up the phone.
So yeah, you can tell from that the background vocals kind of handle the sides and the body of that, and then we want this main to be piercing, right? To be the center of attention, right? It's panned right dead center, so it really kind of steals the show, while the others are much more supporting and almost like a choir standing behind the main vocalist in center stage.
And the final thing that we will talk about is this. We thought about adding a bunch of sax to this song. It is a thing we like doing for sure, but we tried a couple different parts and it didn't really fit the way we wanted. So then we looked back at our first session because we recorded some of these vocals and a bunch of sax parts back in Boston at this place, Mad Oak Studios, with our boy Benny Grata.
What up, Benny?
And there was just a bunch of sax takes that were cool and had some nice sounds. So instead of trying to create a new one, we just kind of went in and figured out if we could use anything from that. And I ended up cutting together this very, very, very short sax part, which you may or may not have noticed in the actual track. Yeah, very short and sweet. But when everything else is happening around it, it adds to it. It sounds pretty cool. Yeah, so that is Problematic in a nutshell.
A large nutshell.
Huge nutshell.
But yeah, again, we really appreciated hearing feedback on the track. This was one we were super excited about getting out. It's we got to use some muscles that we don't always use in the studio when we were making it, so it was a good time. And yeah, as always, any questions that you may have, comment those, and we'll be around. We're always on IG, we're on TikTok. Follow us, send us a message. We love saying hi to anybody, and yeah, we will have some more music to share with you and do some deep dives in the future.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you.